I'm Dr. Elizabeth Perkins, and I'm going to be talking about caring for the caregiver. And I just actually had a power cut when it got started, unfortunately, and I was just going through the overview of the talk. So just to continue that a little bit, they'll be looking at parallels between the different caregiving scenarios, some of my research regarding compound caregiving, and I'll explain what that is when we get to that section of the presentation. And then I just recently finished a chapter, so this is very timely, a book chapter that was specifically about supporting caregivers of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I looked at what I'd written for that and sort of pulled out a lot of those elements for making that applicable to everybody in all different types of caregiving situations. And so my apologies in advance. When I do handouts, I tend to do a lot of text heavy, so they become a good resource for individuals. In your PDFs, just also to note that there are live web links, so everything that has a website attached to it, if you press on the PDF on the actual on the computer, that will link to those websites that are embedded in the presentation. So one of the things that I've mentioned previously is that we do have this disability field that has certain guiding philosophies that might also be translatable, transferable, and to your situations. And one of the things is that we're very sensitive about language and using people-first language. And so we always use the person-first language. So we talk about the person, and then the disability is secondary to that. And so one of the things that we really do emphasize is that disability, and indeed a chronic illness, is an attribute of a person. It doesn't describe the whole person, and it never should be the primary description of a person. And I think that's been a real thing that we've had to fight against in the disability field. There's been a certain stigma of having disabilities and intellectual and developmental disabilities. And when a lot of people were institutionalized and segregated from the community, that actually worsened the situation for that. And so we're very conscious of the need of having good language to describe people, and that they're people first. And some of the guiding philosophies, some of the fundamental rights that we espouse and uphold for people with disabilities, that they have the right to make choices and to have a range of options. A big important one is the right to have and take risks. And sometimes we can be very overprotective of people, but that actually does deny them the chance to learn. And if you think about how you've learned things throughout your life, oftentimes it's from the mistakes you've made and then you do something differently. If you deny people the right to make mistakes or have those risks or take the risks that they might be failure, we often deny people the chance to grow and learn. And so that's been, one of the things, and I'll come back to this theme a little bit later in the presentation, of how that can really circumscribe people's lifestyles if we stop or deny those elements of risk that we all face, and we know that we have to make those opportunities available for people despite a disability, despite a chronic health condition. And then dignity and respect. Sometimes it's very easy for people to pity other people's circumstances, but that is not, we don't think that's a good way to view people, because then you sort of set up this judgment that your circumstances are better or more favorable than somebody else's. And then that sort of doesn't foster an equality of personhood. And respect and equality, dignity and respect, There are all these words that you know, they really mean a great deal to people with disabilities, and you know, the same with chronic health issues, that you're respected and you're allowed to make choices, you're allowed to have risks, and forge your own way in life and to have those opportunities. And so our vision statement here at FCIC is that we have all individuals with developmental disabilities will have the freedom, responsibility, authority, and support to live self-determined lives. And so that is sort of our promotion of self-determination, self-advocacy, and first and foremost, inclusion in all walks of life, in all aspects of life. And again, as I said, with people with disabilities, or anybody that has anything that makes them different from the general population, there can be the way in which the community views them differently, segregates them. And for full inclusion to occur, people have to participate in all aspects of life and have a voice and say what their needs are and take those risks and learn new things. And so it covers all domains of quality of life. So that's sort of like in the context of how we try to support people with developmental disabilities. And this is a quote from Rosalind Carter, former First Lady, wife of Jimmy Carter. That she has an institute for caregiving, and this is a wonderful quote that I think just really does capture the pervasiveness of caregiving roles within our society. And she says that there are 4 kinds of people in the world: those who have been caregivers, those who currently are caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. And in the United States alone, about 1 in 5 of Americans are in an informal caregiving role where they do caregiving duties, responsibilities, and tasks to a member of their family, over and above what you would be considered from parenting. And so, moving to the background of the general research that we've found so far regarding caregiving. As I mentioned in the first introduction, I think it was, we originally developed a lot of the research was derived from people that cared for folks with Alzheimer's disease. And some of the things that were found is that these highly stressed caregivers were at risk for poorer physical and psychological health. And also, one of the things in general caregiving is obviously that the time that you devote to caregiving has ramifications, because it can affect the financial stability of the family. It can intrude upon employment and employment opportunities, or in some cases might stop certain folks being able to be promoted and having the career path that they, if they weren't doing their caregiving responsibilities, that they would have been climbing up a career ladder. And an availability for other relationships. Some of these caregiving roles and responsibilities can be exceptionally time consuming. And so obviously, we only have a limited amount of time, of hours in the day, and if you're providing caregiving roles and you're also working, it can impact other relationships, or the family relationships and further social relationships. And sometimes some caregivers become what we call captives. They have role captivity in their caregiving role. And basically that caregiving role becomes all-consuming, and you know, sometimes it is the case of there's so many hours in the day, and you know, the role takes up all that time. But also some caregivers become captive in their roles because they feel that they have to be on duty 24/7, and there's nobody else that can do what they do, and that can be quite challenging in terms of saying to them, well, you know, let's get other folks involved with the caregiving role, so you don't have to be the only person that does the caregiving. And then sort of, you know, I always think there's always two sides to a coin, and with caregiving, yes, we see that there can be challenges, but there's also benefits. And, you know, with having a strong caregiving role, in sometimes it can reconnect or strengthen a relationship far beyond what a parental relationship can be, because of the closeness and the time spent over and above what you would be doing in that circumstances. It can be personally rewarding and boost self-esteem. And also, you know, when you're providing the care, you have the ability to know that person is receiving, you know, the best individualized attention. Nobody knows a person better than their family member, and it, you know, that it can stay in their home environment rather than living in a long-term care facility. So obviously those are benefits of providing care within one's home that we see. So part of my research has looked, you know, so there was these general differences or general commonalities, I should say, of caregiving. And one of the things that I wanted to look at, well, what makes these different caregiving scenarios challenging in different circumstances. And obviously, because my area is aging, I've predominantly focused on aging caregivers that have been caregivers of people with children with intellectual and developmental disability that have remained within the family home. So these are folks that aren't living in supported living environments or group homes or other long-term care settings, but they have remained in the family home. And so I've been looking at caregivers in their later life. And again, what struck me is when I was sort of looking through this and preparing the slides for today, is that there are, again, places where I see that people, caregivers in circumstances of looking after a child with Barth syndrome would see, you know, some commonalities here. And in my work, I found that there were sort of three concerns that were over and above what individuals in general caregiving scenarios were, and these were that there was an extensive lifelong duration of a caregiving role. One of the things that may or might not come into play so much with folks is health issues in the caregiver due to aging, and then also fears about the long-term future. And the benefits are that in people with intellectual disability, the parental caregiving is a normal, typical role, and the parents become experts in their role. So those are sort of like what struck at me straight away. And you know, what we'll do is talk a little bit more in depth about each of those areas. So the extensive duration of the caregiving role is that the fact that, you know, people can be a caregiver for years, for decades in this situation, whereas most caregiving research in the past has focused on folks that have looked after people with Alzheimer's, that might only be sort of a shorter duration of 3 or 4 years, and that was sort of the average of a caregiving role. And so it can be a lifelong career, and particularly for people in the circumstances of being a lifelong caregiver of a person with intellectual or developmental disability. They're often referred to as perpetual parents, because that caregiving, the parent role, ordinarily you'd see folks moving away from the home, having their own, you know, living forging their own relationships, and launching, as we call it, launching. When you launch, you know, you sort of the empty nest syndrome, and that for some people is really a very big difference between individuals, you know, who are parents that have children without any disabilities. And so this length of time, this perpetual parents, has been couched with the term captive or captivated. And this was an interesting work that was done where some people, some parents actually stated that they felt captive in their role as a caregiver for their child with intellectual disabilities. And some people said no, there was actually what they said that was sort of captivated, that they felt that the life that they'd had, because they'd had a son or daughter with intellectual disabilities, it really enriched their life. And some research had been done using these sort of two different ways of how caregivers of people in this circumstance view their life. And captive parents who felt that some of their ambitions had been curtailed because of having a child with a disability, they experienced higher levels of parental stress and pessimism. And so sometimes it's that perception and that appraisal of the situation that you're in that can really make a difference with your psychological health and in how you cope with the caregiving role in these circumstances. The third one in my list, like I say, I think the health issues with aging might not be so much of an issue. In people with intellectual disability, you know, you have people that are aging with intellectual disability living at home, and their life expectancies are now into their 50s, 60s and 70s. So their parents are never going to know a life without being a caregiver. And so obviously as they're getting into their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, they're having their own aging process that they actually need to be, you know, it's going to impact their ability to be a caregiver to their son or daughter. So the third one, though, is fears about long-term future of the care recipient. And this brings, you know, an anxiety, again, because of this increased life expectancy, that, you know, what's going to happen to my son or daughter when I'm no longer there. And so in people with you know, these major life transitions occur across a lifespan. And so for a caregiver of a person with Barth syndrome, you know, I think that one of the things that I've learned from my conversations with Shelley is that there can be quite a variation in the life expectancy, but we are seeing more and more people get to adulthood, get to young adulthood, and actually getting to, you know, a point where they're thinking about having their own family and going to college and getting married, which, you know, from 20, 30 years ago, that might not have even been thought about. And we have, again, parallels with that in the disability field. So those sort of, I think, struck chords with me as being very common in terms of sort of having some applicability. The other side of the coin, I said, is the potentially beneficial factors. When we talk about caregivers, often we think about people that become a caregiver, and this is the normative nature of parental caregiving. You know, if you're a parent caregiver, you're a parent and a caregiver. Sort of, it's a complete package. Whereas some people become a caregiver to their father or their mother or another family member, which changes the dynamics of that previous family relationship. So when we don't have that change, you're caregiving in a role that's in addition to your family role, which would be a parent to be nurturing and to be encouraging. That makes life a little bit easier than adjusting to a caregiving role for somebody that previously was, you know, in a mother role or a father role to you. And another thing is that because in certain circumstances, if you're a caregiver and you've done it for quite some time and you're sort of overcoming different challenges as time progresses, you learn from all these different challenges that you face. Then you gain a lot of expertise and mastery in being a caregiver. It might not come easy to you. Some people might get into the role easier than others, but the sheer passage of time can very much help people become a master caregiver. They're very good at their roles, and they become very attuned with what helps their care recipients best. And then something that I've lately been looking at is the role of reciprocity, because we often think about caregiving as a one-way street. And, you know, the caregiver is giving rather than receiving. And as we said, you know, there are beneficial aspects. And in people with intellectual disability, what we're seeing, you know, especially with older caregivers, is that people say that they actually get more from the relationship than they give, and in terms of emotionally and in terms of actually help within the household and things like that. So, you know, that there is, as people are growing older with intellectual disability, one of the things I've noticed is that you have some types of a reversal process going on, and particularly those with less severe disabilities, that we notice this trend in. And so this reciprocity is also, you know, another way of looking at that caregiving dynamic. So for this presentation, I did a little look at any of the literature. Like Shelley mentioned, there was very little literature that actually focused on caregivers of children with chronic illness. And so I looked at sort of the reports that were out there, and just to see whether, you know, any of the common issues or trends that had been found in the literature. And one of the things in one of the papers by Power was that there had been four areas mainly that was, and we've mentioned a couple of these already, about the familiar impact, the impact of being a caregiver of a child with a chronic illness, how that impacts the whole family and the family structure. A difficulty with how you adhere to treatment regimens. Dealing with pain, and I can only imagine that can be extremely stressful, having to deal with a young one that has a lot of chronic pain issues. And then the disruption that can occur with schooling, and you know, how that can impact a person's life, how it impacts relationship building with their other peers in school, if they're, you know, starting one class and are held back because of the times that they're having a lot of treatments and not attending school so much. So those were identified. And then a more recent review highlighted that there are higher levels of parental stress, and that these are more so related to the level of responsibility that they had for overall treatment management. So, you know, if they were doing a lot of the sort of the clinical procedural aspects of care, and sort of being the linchpin in terms of arranging and doing a lot of things of that nature, that was created a higher level of stress, and it was unrelated really to the type of illness, severity or duration. And so I think that was quite a telling finding. And then this increased level of stress increases the likelihood of people having symptoms of depression and anxiety. And so that's, like I say, there's not a lot of literature out there, but that's what I could find that I thought was relevant to share with you. Shelley, I just noticed that there was a little question up there. Was there any questions that anybody wanted to ask right now, or should I go on?
I haven't seen any. None of the questions have been posed through to me. I've been following the chat, but
Okay.
if there is anything, if you receive something, then that's fine. But I'm not seeing anything. Keeping an eye.
Okay, great. So The next area that I looked at is what I've called compound caregiving. And one of the reasons that, you know, we are in an age where we're all living longer, our parents are living longer, and we're more likely to becoming caregivers to other members of family than ever before. And this, you know, is an issue when you already have a person that's already a lifelong caregiver. And so that was sort of an area that sort of was highlighted to me, actually from one of my my students from a while back, who she was a parent with a son with Down syndrome that has lupus, and he. What was interesting to me, we were doing, she was doing some directed studies with me, and one of the things I asked her to do was to sort of document across the lifespan of having her son, when were the times that were really stressful. And one of the interesting things that she, you know, she came back with a paper, and it was, you know, very interesting to me, because what it really spoke to wasn't the fact of, oftentimes we say about these transition times, you know, when her son was leaving special education and then, you know, trying to find suitable vocational opportunities for him, and a transition to adult services and so on. It wasn't that so much that she said that she had issues with. It was when she also had to do some caregiving duties to other members of her family. And, you know, she's already obviously got quite extensive caregiving duties, then also added on the additional caregiving duties to other family members. She found that very problematic. And so I did some studies regarding that. And this is just a chart to sort of, with some of the outcomes that I found, and it was with a study of 91. And these were older caregivers. The mean age was 60, and they were caregivers of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities who lived at home with them. And one of the interesting things here is, if you look at where the highlighted red on the chart is that 37% of that sample, over a third of the sample, were compound caregivers. They were already a caregiver to their son or daughter, and then they were already doing additional caregiving responsibilities to another member of their family. And when I asked the question, had you ever been a compound caregiver, nearly 70% said yes, they'd been in this situation. And another 34% anticipated, irrespective of whether they were a caregiver or a compound caregiver right now, being a compound caregiver in the future. So they had a mother that they said, you know, was getting older and more frail, and they anticipated that they needed to be a caregiver to her, or they had an aunt that they knew that they would become the caregiver to. And the median duration of the caregiving was over 3 years, and so they were in these situations for three years at a time on average, where they were becoming caregivers to other people. So not only had they got the caregiving role, they got this additional caregiving role for another for 3 years on average, and there was quite a wide variation in that. That's why I reported the median rather than the mean there. And interestingly, most folks, it was mom or dad, and some were for other siblings or their spouse. And the major health issue was that their other loved one that was becoming the second care recipient, they had Alzheimer's disease, were elderly frail, or advanced macular degeneration. So there were people that were needed a lot of care and to maintain their activities of daily living, to maintain their safety. And so the take-home message for compound caregivers was that you know, they weren't immune to providing additional caregiving, even though they were already a long-term caregiver to their son or daughter with intellectual and developmental disability. And I did ask them, the people that were in these multiple caregiving roles, what was the most difficult thing that they found. And it was on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest. And there were some ones that sort of come to the top of the pile. And the most important thing that these multiple caregivers said that was an issue was not being able to have time for their me time, things that they do, or lack of an adequate help from others, feeling stressed and emotionally drained, being physically tired, prioritizing caregiving demands, juggling all what you have to do for one person might come at a very inconvenient time for the other person that you're providing care to, and finding someone to care for their son or daughter when they're caring for the other care recipient. Like I said, all these caregiving tasks, we only have so much of a pie in our hours of the day, and it's very hard to divide that up between individuals when you're in those circumstances. So these are a selection of quotes, and here, it's just to sort of highlight the fact that it was seen as quite difficult. The caregiving time with caregiving duties stops me from being able to encourage my son to do more. I feel guilty that I'm not able to spend quality time with my other children, and guilty that I need their help. I feel anxiety and resentment simultaneously dealing with my husband's issues. It has affected the quality of my marital relationship. So you see here that there are difficulties, that we've seen with folks with just caregiving, and then when you have additional caregiving roles on top, that can be quite problematic. So caregiving overall is a balancing act. There's good things and there's bad things. We do know that people experience a lot of stress, and we do know some people cope very well with that stress. And so we look at it as a balancing act of these different types of stressors. So we might have primary caregiving stressors, and see that these are just the basics of caregiving, providing care, bathing, things of that nature. Secondary stressors, and we call those spillover effects from the caregiving role. And so this is when you might have issues arising with your employment, with your other family relationships. And then, we also, have things happen, like at the start of this webinar, that can create a bit of stress, that we lose power, and we have things that happen, such as we lose significant people in our life, we cope with bereavements, we move houses, change jobs. That can be a chronic event that also adds to those stresses. So life goes on, life is life, and just because we're caregivers doesn't mean the other aspects of life do not go on. And so coping, again, with these coping resources, they can be internal or external within us, or things that we utilize that are beyond us. And so having that sense of meaning can be a really good way of coping and deriving esteem from the caregiving role. And it's really how you view those caregiving responsibilities. And as some folks often say, they find the joy, they find the pleasure being able to serve and provide that level of care and attention, knowing that their care recipient is getting the best attention that they can. And external is obviously going to other folks, problem-solving skills, brainstorming, if you have a particular challenge that comes up. So you see, there's a lot of variables at play here to how some people rise to the challenge of caregiving and how some people become burdened by it. And, it is interpersonal factors, and it's extrapersonal factors as well. So really the crux is what can we do? And again, this information was from a chapter that I've recently written that was predominantly for healthcare providers. But it's information if you're a caregiver that you should be able to adapt, or if you're supporting other caregivers, that this is good information that they should be thinking about, or you should encourage them to think about. And one of the things, first and foremost, is always have time to listen to caregivers. Oftentimes the health needs of the care recipient are first and foremost. And it's really important to acknowledge that the caregiver has a voice. A caregiver can tell you a lot of good information, but also the fact of just being aware that they would want to talk. I did interviews with older caregivers, and you know, the length of questions that I had to ask them really only used to take between 45 minutes to an hour. And all my interviews were finished within an hour, but I didn't leave any of these caregivers for at least 2.5 hours because they wanted to talk. And it was an opportunity for them to talk that they hadn't had, from somebody external to the circumstances. Excuse me. And another thing is that the doctors, I think this is a great quote about knowing that information about being a good caregiver and being aware of, what is it going to mean to have a disability, what is it going to mean to have a chronic illness. And I think this quote is a good one about my child's doctor told me 26 years ago, I insist you know more about your child's disease than I do because you're going to live with it. And I learned 26 years ago, and I've passed that on to everybody. And I think that's, it really exemplifies the quote. So the next thing is to encourage the building of abilities rather than focus on difficulties. And this is, particularly people with disabilities, like I said, sometimes we say, okay, they can't do this because of X, Y, and Z. We have to challenge a lot of preconceived notions of what life can and will be like, because there's been assumptions and there's been restrictions on people in the past that have really stopped the opportunity for them to learn and grow and to be able to achieve things because those opportunities weren't open to them. So here, what I want to do is to think about this can't-do cycle. And I teach medical students, and sort of like, one of the things is it's very powerful for the healthcare professional to set the right tone of, okay, these are the sort of what we can expect, but also, challenge some of those expectations. Sometimes we say we have these negative beliefs are formed, and that lowers expectations. And when that happens, people with disabilities are devalued for how they can participate in society, and then those opportunities might never be even presented. And so it's sort of a vicious cycle, and it's applicable to people with chronic illness as well. That there is this when people are different in any way, sometimes there's fear rather than promoting what can be done. So this is the can-do cycle. Excuse me. The can-do cycle is that we do have positive beliefs and that we raise expectations. If you raise expectations, there's more opportunities, and then you challenge those stigmas, and people think, oh, things might be different, things can be different. And that's very powerful, if you challenge the status quo. And there's many examples of how things are so different now in the field of disabilities. 30, 40 years ago, to think of a person with Down syndrome driving would probably be unheard of. And yet we do see people with Down syndrome that have climbed Mount Everest, that have completed marathons. We know parents with Down syndrome that have had children without Down syndrome. And again, if you think about when these folks were institutionalized and all these areas of growth were denied to them, you wouldn't have fathomed that this would be possible in our lifetime to see these things occurring, and yet they are. But again, it's fighting the challenge of what those preconceived notions of what life is like and what life will be like, and how you work within the parameters of a disability or the chronic illness to get those goals in life that you want to achieve. And, you know, it's thinking outside the box often. And when I was researching, I saw that Shelley, the real thing that I was struck by was the stories of the children and young adults with Barth syndrome. And I'm not going to say these quotes. These are poignant words from Shelley's own son, Michael. And, you know, really the fact of you know, he wasn't going to let the condition determine his life, I think is a testament to not only him, but I think obviously the support and love and the encouragement that he had from an astounding mother that Shelley was to him. And so I think that, you know, that again, those preconceived notions of, yes, we know that there's going to be certain difficulties, there's going to be a lot of challenges, there's going to be a lot of health issues, but life and what a person wants to pursue in life, even if there are difficulties and obstacles, those life plans can still be achieved. Number 3, encourage use of available support services. Now this, again, sometimes people can get pigeonholed in terms of their caregiving roles and don't look to the resources and the information that's available and that's out there. And it's not only just a case of, you know, with getting access to resources and services, but it also helps in inclusion and socialization and learning for both you and the care recipient. And encouraging learning of skills that would aid caregiving. Obviously, you know, you have a lot of caregivers actively engaged in the development of talents and optimizing a care recipient's abilities. They themselves are going to have an impressive range of abilities, caregiving skills that they can come into play when they face challenges or problems, or able to tell other people about how they problem solve a certain difficulty that they've overcome. This is an important area now, encouraging the building of an informal network of support. We are in a time of budgetary challenges, that services are squeezed, and so what we see is not just the formal services that can be a benefit to caregivers, but the informal services, an informal network of support. And again, this is useful, you know, if you have a base of people and associations that you can utilize their information, that you can access for socializing. That becomes a wider social support network that also helps to promote inclusion within the community, awareness of your challenges and the challenges of your care recipient. And these sources can lead to additional sources of help for you personally in your caregiving role. So that's always important to look beyond what's formally provided services to informally provided services. Caregivers, do encourage caregivers to participate in family parent caregiver support groups or professional family caregiving associations. And I think here really it's that support network of being with other people that are in similar circumstances that can give you a lot of great information. It also is an avenue that you can vent your frustrations. There's no caregiver out there that doesn't feel frustrated at some point. It's bound to happen. It's natural that it will happen. But sometimes, you know, you don't feel you can vent with other family members, or, you know, you want somebody, like I say, when I was doing my interviews, it was, you know, a purging that happened with a lot of caregivers and saying, you know, this is a difficulty, this is a difficulty, but, you know, I don't like to talk about it with my family. We have enough that we need to cope with. And again, having that different person outside the circle of the immediate family can be very helpful for a caregiver to talk to. And, you know, one of the beautiful things about technology is that we have this new online community, and I've just done a paper regarding the use of online social support for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their caregivers, and you know, they're now adopting this medium as a way of connecting, and especially if you're socially isolated or find it difficult because of the caregiving role, this external virtual online community can be a real source of great support and information for people. That anybody that sort of, you know, is a user of Facebook and so will tell you that, you know, it's a great way of keeping in touch with people and a great way of sharing and feeling part of other people's lives, as well as not just being consumed in their own life. This is a big one, and I say this, promoting collaboration and discussion of caregiving issues. Work activity is an issue. Some caregivers are apprehensive of asking others because they feel it's a reflection on their ability as a caregiver, which is, you know, obviously it's total nonsense. It's a case of, you know, if you need the help, you need the help. Shelley, did you just laugh then? I thought I heard somebody then. So some caregivers do try to manage the situations without bringing other people into the conversation, and you know, that's a difficulty. Also, you know, it's good to let other people become proficient in the caregiving role. And so if you're always doing a certain procedure, or you're always taking your son or daughter to the doctors and never allowing other family members to be part of that, you're sort of not allowing them to be partners in the care providing. And that is really important, to share the load. You know, things can crop up at any moment, and if you've got some folks that are already quite familiar with providing care, you know, you don't go that crisis situation when it occurs doesn't feel so, you know, fear and dread and apprehension, because you've got some support structure there of other people being, you know, familiar with what care needs to be provided. And you need to have those talks and need to open up those talks and promoting those collaborations, the family collaborations, the extended family collaborations. Respite care and me time. As I said, one of the #1 things, particularly with caregivers that have multiple responsibilities, they lose themselves. They lose the ability to do the things that they just, them alone, like to do. That it's not responsible for other people, that is their hobby, that's their joy. And even if it's just for a couple of hours a week, it can have a profound impact on the well-being of a person if they have some time just to take a deep breath, just to watch a film that they want to watch, just to go out and have their hair cut, have a mani-pedi, just to do some of those things that it's for them and nobody else. And so one of the things that we really, you know, try to stress is that, you know, everybody needs a break. Even the most hard-working, dedicated person, if they do that over and over without taking a vacation or taking a break, they become burnt out. And the same thing happens with caregiving. You can become quickly wore out if you don't make it an important aspect to have some me time and take that use of respite care, however that might be available, and if not, have that. That's where the informal, dividing up those caregiving roles with the family and allowing you to take that time. Very, very important. I can't stress that enough. Caregivers spend so much time, this is #9 now, encouraging caregivers to be attentive to their own health. Caregivers spend so much time thinking about somebody else that they don't think about themselves health-wise either. And some research has actually indicated that they tend to downplay their own health because of the fact that they know they have to be available for their caregiving role. And so they march onwards regardless. You know, again, It's a situation where if you have a healthy caregiver, you're able to provide, better care because you're not getting physically and mentally burnt out. And those physical breaks, those mental breaks, and psychological time outs that we have, that to just recharge our batteries, very, very important. Think about your own health. Think about a caregiver's health as well as the care recipient. Like I say, it's easy to get lost in that mix. And then future planning for both a caregiver, care recipient, and particularly as we talk about people with disabilities. What is their hopes and dreams? Always be looking to sort of the future of, okay, we know that there's some realities that are out there, but we also, all of us have dreams. We all have something that we want to strive towards and something that we want out of life, the relationships that we have, the talents that we possess, the things that we want to do, if we want to go to college, if we want to learn new things. Those should be encouraged to the maximum. And it's really, our own finding meaning and purpose in life. And it's so enriching for people with disabilities to have access and to be in the community and to be included in the community. If you think about 30, 40, 50 years ago when they were institutionalized and in settings that were, didn't allow them to think about, well, I could go to work, I can marry, I have children, I can do anything that I really set my mind to. That was missing because, again, there was expectations, well, they could never do that. Well, people can, and people surprise us all the time, and it's really about that future planning, about what they want to do and to go for it. So those were my tips, and I added a few more from the familycaregiver.org. This is, I think, 3 little tips that were, that I didn't particularly mention, but I think are important ones to conclude on, really. I said much about reaching out to other people. If people do offer to help, the worst thing you can do is refuse it, because you're setting up a barrier of continuing that I can cope alone. So accept the offer, but, make it, suggest specific things that they can do. So if it's to run to the grocery store, if it's to fetch another child from school, make it something tangible that they can actually help and assist with. Very, very, people want to help, but people sometimes don't know how to help. If you say, this would be really helpful for me if you could do this and this, and be very specific, that makes life, that can be very, very helpful and encouraging to other people that want to help and say, oh, well, I know that you need some help doing this. Can I assist in that? There's also a difference between caring and doing. We have a lot of new technologies opening up that promote and help loved ones' independence, communication devices, mobility devices. All of these are adding to the quality of life and allowing people more and more independence, especially in the disability field. That is really important as well, because we can become over-enabling of people, and then, they don't get to learn their life skills because everything's being done for them. Even if it takes, I'm a congenital amputee. I was born without my right arm. And I wanted to do nursing, and the first director of nurse education said to me, oh, well, who gets you dressed on a morning? There was just this blinkered look of, well, you're a person with one arm, that doesn't fit my profile of what a nurse should look like. Think about in terms of what people's perceptions are and how he was not enabling to me. He was just saying, no, you can't do that. I'd rather employ somebody else to become a student nurse here. And so it's really important to think about those things, how you can help build life skills by being open to those possibilities. And stand up for your rights as a caregiver and a citizen, and make your voice heard, you know, in terms of advocating for more support services or more respite services if you're not getting what you feel that you deserve. A collective caregiver's voice has much more than just a single lone parent. And, you know, Shelley is the epitome of this in terms of getting together a group of people worldwide with the common vision of raising awareness of Barth syndrome. That is, you know, an incredibly rare syndrome, but forging those connections collectively, the collective knowledge is so important. Shelley's just asked about my my mother's experience. Do you want me to do that now, Shelley?
I'm muted. Yeah, I thought that when you were talking about your nursing school experience, I remember you telling me about how your mother was empowered by the experience when you were born. I thought it
Yes,
was a wonderful
yes.
story.
Yes, I'm happy to do that. When I was first born, my mother didn't see me for 12 hours. I was rushed away, and she saw me 12 hours later. The doctor was doing his rounds, and he said, "Mrs. Perkins, have you seen your daughter yet?" And she said, "No." And, you know, I said, "I'm really worried because they wouldn't let me, you know, see her." And the doctor said, "Well, Mrs. Perkins, your daughter has one arm shorter than the other." And so when my mother first saw me, she had an anticipation that I had two arms, but one was shorter than the other. In reality, I have just a little bit of a stump, about 3 inches of a stump on my right arm. So my complete right arm is basically missing. So the expectation there sort of set her up for a, "oh my goodness," response when she first saw me. And she was obviously quite upset because there was, you know, this was the way that the news had been delivered to her. And also the way that it had been delivered had been somewhat misleading. And so what happened was that she was very upset, and there was a nurse that said, "She's going to be fine. What you need to do is to let her find her own way of doing things. And it might take longer for her to learn, or she might do it with different things, doing different things, and she might do it in a different way." And she actually said that, you know, she'd seen other children with congenital amputees that, you know, use their feet instead of their hands, and which is actually what I used to do. My right foot became my right hand, sort of thing, with certain things that I used to do. And that was my mother never forgot that, and I've always been fiercely independent because of that. And so, you know, like I said, one of the important things is those initial expectations and having the right message delivered in a meaningful way. So just closing up now with a few more resources. This is a book, Easing Your Stress. It's a little booklet, I should say. Again, you can click on it and download it for free. You can contact the Florida Developmental Disability Council. You can Google it and find them on the website, and actually order hard copies of it if you prefer, rather than the downloaded versions. But some of the things that we mention in there is obviously being selfish by doing things for yourself and looking after yourself. And stress is a reaction to an event rather than the event itself. And I say the importance of how we appraise future, how we appraise the situation that we find ourselves in. And these are some other web resources for caregivers, and again, they're for general caregiving for the main, but they have some good information, and, you know, I would encourage you to take a peek at these different websites. And so I want to close by, you know, in my sort of circumstances, as well as I didn't share with you that my mother was a caregiver for my grandmother with Alzheimer's for many years, so this is why I've always had an interest in caregivers. And then after I qualified as a nurse in the field of intellectual and developmental disability in the UK, and my sister subsequently has a son with autism. So this is why I'm very, the quality of life of families and caregivers is very important to me. And I think that, like say, one of the things I see over and over again is that sometimes people forget to just enjoy life and you know, be thankful for the fact that there is things that we can do, support that we can get, and that, you know, if you make the right outreach to enough different people, that you can find support in your caregiving role and cherish that role rather than it being a challenge. So on that note, I'm going to close. This is my contact information, and I think Shelley will send that with you. And anything that I've mentioned, or any of the reports, or any of the journal articles, if you have an interest in them, I am more than happy to send you the PDFs of those or any other information. And I would really love to hear from you, and hopefully, like I say, it's not quite my area of expertise, but I really hope that this has been a very useful webinar for you, that there's been things that you can take home or utilize in your work or in your caregiving role. And again, thank you so much, Shelley, for giving me this really unique opportunity to sort of step out of my sphere of knowledge to sort of like apply it to a different area. And like I say, I hope that it has resonated with your audience.